When we say mother, it can mean a lot of different things. I mean, you've got 23 movies called Mother and one called Mother. You could be talking about a good video game or a bad Blondie song. But ignoring pop culture references, the term mother comes loaded with connotations. In our culture, being a mother is more than just giving birth to a baby. Just look at the verb to mother. If you mother something, then you nurture it, you care for it. You don't just bring it into existence. In fact, the word for that is to father. At the core of a modern understanding of motherhood is this idea of a maternal instinct, an innate and universal drive that compels women to not only have children, but to care for them fully and unconditionally. More than ever, we have ads showing pregnant women in a state of bliss. This may seem universal until you look at a place like China, where the same imagery is used to sell abortions. This idea comes up in our debates about abortion, contraceptives, family life, all those things. But what if I told you that the maternal instinct is a myth? Hi, my name's Teddy, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of motherhood. Specifically, I'm going to look at this idea of the maternal instinct. Where does it come from? Why do we still believe it? Is it even true? And what are we actually talking about when we talk about a maternal instinct? But before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe because I'm lonely. Disclaimer! Look, this is admittedly a very big topic. I'm mainly going to focus on the Western idea of the mother, which already isn't a monolith. I could do a whole video on the French mother, on the American mother, on the African American mother, but I'm making a YouTube video and not a dissertation. And you know what? This is my channel. I'll do whatever I gosh darn please. Unless, of course, YouTube gives me a copyright strike, in which case I'm a slave to the system, baby. Anyways, with no further ado, moms away! We haven't always believed in motherly love. In fact, in ancient Rome, 20 to 40% of children were abandoned by their parents and left in the street. The church even encouraged this in the Middle Ages to discourage infanticide. Even when women have kept their kids, they haven't always cared for them how we would today.
I think notions of motherhood has changed significantly.
That's Dr. Susan Wansink, professor of German studies, author of this book, and mother of me.
Children just were to be seen and not heard.
In 18th century Europe, right after giving birth, mothers would drop off their kids with wet nurses and just pick them up 3 years later. By the 1700s, 90% of babies in France were wet nursed.
If people were in the upper social class, well, they would pretty much farm their kids out to wet nurses and nannies. If they were in the working class, well, the mothers were probably pretty busy working, just trying to survive. So they didn't give a lot of attention to their kids. People never gave a thought until the early 20th century, the effects of childhood on adult life. I mean, it was just not a concept.
Kids were seen as kind of the stupid, useless version of adults, which I still kind of stand by. I think we should bring that back. Normalize making fun of kids. They were perceived as immature, unripe adults, a burden that would eventually turn into an economic investment since they could help run the family business, support the parents in their old age, etc. Well, then where did the idea of maternal instinct come from? Well, there are three big culprits. The first is French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the biggest thinkers of the Enlightenment. When Rousseau was growing up, people still thought that kids were inherently bad. They had this original sin, and the way to get it out of them would be to beat it out of them or be especially harsh or cruel. Rousseau, however, began preaching the opposite. Children are inherently good. They are born innocent, and it's the world that corrupts them. There is therefore something valuable in childhood that must be preserved and protected. To prove this theory, Rousseau did what any good philosopher should do, and write a cute little story about it. This was Emile, or An Education. It's the story of a boy who isn't raised with the heavy-handed instruction of the time, but instead allowed the freedom to follow his own childish instincts. He ultimately becomes the model citizen. So, good for him. According to Rousseau, if the child's an innocent, special little bundle of joy, then it's the mother's role to bring that out of them. She has a responsibility to form a bond with the child when they're growing up. And Rousseau makes sure that you know this. Let mothers deign to nurse their children. Morals will reform themselves. Nature's sentiments will be awakened in every heart, and the state will be repopulated. Rousseau was not a fan of subtlety. But the point is, children now having value, the mother was in charge of taking care of them because they were the natural caregiver. The French people ate it up, and the philosophy laid out in that book became the basis of the modern French education system and really of all of the theory of education in the Western world. This maternal instinct was strengthened a few decades later with our culprit number 2, Charlie Darwin. Chuck, if you will. As you know, Darwin was the one who came up with a theory of evolution and natural selection. If the maternal instinct was kind of implied in the work of Rousseau, Darwin straight up says it. Women seem to differ from man in mental disposition, chiefly in her greater tenderness and less selfishness. Woman, owing to her maternal instincts, displays these qualities towards her infants in an eminent degree. So according to Darwin, motherhood was an impulse in all women by nature. We'll talk about the validity of these claims later, but the important thing is that this was the first very popular biological argument for maternal instinct and this kind of motherhood. Of course, it's the woman who stays at home because that's how nature has wired us, right? The third guy was a certified weirdo, Sigmund Freud. Now, it would be easy to point to the Oedipal stuff and call it a day, but Freud's contribution to the idea of the mother is actually much more fundamental than that. Remember, Freudian psychoanalysis introduces us to the idea that we have an unconscious, that we have mechanisms in our brain that we can't perceive, but that control our thoughts and our actions. This is one of the few things that Freud has said that hasn't been completely rejected. In this worldview, childhood is even more vital. It's the period of your life where all the parts of your brain are getting wired. That's why it's up to the mother, again, the natural caregiver, to guarantee the child's happiness not only during childhood, but for their entire lives. These three worldviews work together. If Rousseau moralized the maternal instinct, Darwin geneticized it, and Freud medicalized it. Now, I'll clarify this later on, but I'm not trying to say that we should reject evolution or the unconscious or anything like that, but rather that we need to recognize how these ideas are being used as tools to control women's behavior. What we get is the idea that a natural, good woman sacrifices for her child, but an unnatural, bad woman is selfish, mean, and perhaps worst of all, abnormal. Once you get to the 1900s, nearly everyone had bought into this idea of the maternal instinct.
There was a rigid and patriarchal legal code in the late 19th century Prussia, and it was the husband who determined how the children were to be raised, including how long a woman had to breastfeed her child, which she was legally obliged to do.
Even first-wave feminists like French suffragist Hubertine Auclair said that for the savage, the child is an asset, but for the civilized people, the child is a duty. The maternal instinct was just a given. That is, until the rise of second-wave feminism, which sought to liberate the woman from her role as housewife. Simone de Beauvoir literally said, "There is no such thing as a maternal instinct. The mother's attitude is defined by her total situation and by the way she accepts it. It is, as we have seen, extremely variable." Basically, stop mansplaining motherhood to us, we'll do it if we feel like it. This sparks a whole movement where American feminists question Freud and psychoanalysis, and we get big political advancements across the Western world, like contraceptive and abortion rights. You get the sexual revolution, encouraging women to use their bodies how they like. This whole section could be a video by itself. But the bottom line is that we started moving more towards valuing personal fulfillment for women rather than this more narrow social role. So you'd think, well, that's great. If there are more accepted paths for a woman besides just housewife and mother, then the pressure to be a mother should go down, right? But what we find is actually the opposite. Historian Elaine Tyler May writes, "Ironically, the increasing legitimacy attached to a variety of reproductive options has increased pressures and heightened the social stakes in reproduction. Americans have become more, not less, preoccupied with their own reproductive fates, and everyone else's." And you can see this pressure play out everywhere in the modern world.
In Germany, a Rabenmutter is a raven mother. It's a derogatory term for mothers who are absent. They leave their kids alone, like the raven apparently leaves the kids alone in the nest, and they just care about themselves. They're ambitious, and they're not very attractive because supposedly the ravens are a very unattractive looking bird.
American philosopher Jennifer Aniston said that she rejects, quote, "the perpetuation of this notion that women are somehow incomplete, unsuccessful, or unhappy if they're not married with children. Many doctors refuse sterilization procedures to women based on the assumption that later on down the line, she'll regret it and actually want to have kids. Mothering is not a patriotic duty anymore, but it is a cultural norm. And nowadays, with in vitro fertilization and fertility clinics, most women who want a baby can have one. That means that this idea of the maternal instinct has become even more intertwined with our modern conceptions of motherhood. And it makes sense. It's subtle, it seems historically accurate, and most of all, it seems biologically intuitive. But that's the problem. Look, I can see you typing now. Hey Teddy, wow, great research and jawline. But I must ask, isn't there already proof of maternal instinct in biology? Since, women produce hormones like oxytocin and prolactin that create a psychological bond to the child. Keep up the good work. Love you. First of all, love you too. Second, look, I'm not a biologist. I'm a guy with a camera who sounds kind of like Michael Cera and looks like that toaster strudel kid.
Toaster strudel, yeah?
But even biology doesn't really support the idea of a maternal instinct. If we look at the animal kingdom, we can squash this idea that all creatures care for their kids. Most lizards and snakes lay their eggs in a random hole and ditch them long before they hatch. And cute little pandas have twins all the time, but almost always choose to look after the stronger one and abandon the other. And humans aren't as different as you may like to think. American anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy wrote the book on the subject, and what she found is that the maternal instinct does not exist in the way we like to think about it. First of all, not all women have the impulse to have children. It's very context dependent. Hrdy found that most primate mothers, including humans, will choose better material conditions over having a child nearly every time. That is the real instinct. And if a woman has a baby, it's not certain that she'll actually develop any meaningful attachment to it. She needs to feel materially safe, have a community that can help raise the child, and even then, a bond won't form unless she spends her first hours and days after birth with the child. Only then does the body start making hormones like prolactin, which would be the closest thing to a biological maternal instinct, which not even everyone agrees with. If a woman does not have proper food, shelter, and community support, then keeping the child is, evolutionarily speaking, naturally speaking, the illogical choice. Evolutionarily successful mothers are not selfless and all-sacrificing, but rather ambitious, sexual, and, when needed, ambivalent to their own offspring. Maternal instinct is ultimately a red herring. When it's used as an argument, it's meant to define what a woman should naturally want, what is naturally good for a woman. But what is natural isn't what's good. Is it natural to fly in airplanes and poop indoors and make mediocre video essays? No, but they're all vital to human life as we know it today. We don't want to fall into biological determinism, the idea that our biology should determine how we should act. We don't learn morality from studying brain chemistry, so we shouldn't judge a woman's actions based on it either. But there's something bigger at play here. As we've seen, people have been arguing for the maternal instinct since before there was any scientific proof of it. And what this means is that this has always been more of a social debate than a scientific one. When we argue about maternal instinct, we're not really arguing about biology, but more about the role of the woman in the family and in society. Why does this matter? Well, the maternal instinct is often looked at as a biological fact, but in reality, it's a political tool. The most obvious political goal, historically speaking, has been to keep the woman in the home. It's what a natural, good mother does. She cares for her children no matter what and sacrifices all. And if she doesn't, then the kid will grow up to be scarred for the rest of their life. That is the implicit threat of the maternal instinct. Nowadays, fewer people think that the woman should just stay at home, but there are still these rising stereotypes of the absent mother, or on the other end of the spectrum, the mother who can do it all, who has a job and runs an Etsy shop and still has time to drop off her kids at school. And unsurprisingly, the idea of a maternal instinct plays a pretty big role in the abortion debate as well. Mother Teresa said, "We must not be surprised when we hear of murders, of killings, of war, of hatred. If a mother can kill her own child, what is left but for us to kill each other? A nation that kills its children in the womb has lost its soul." Quick correction, Mother Teresa didn't actually say this, but the argument is still used by pro-life people and they attribute this quote to her, so the point still stands. What Mother Teresa is implying here is that at the core of our society and our morality is a mother's love for her child. And if we lose that, then the world becomes morally bankrupt. Now, I'm not arguing for infanticide. It's not really my thing, never has been. But what I am saying is that we need to recognize the status that we give the child in our society. It's very easy to go to save the children as an argument, but when we do that, we end up placing the theoretical child over real women. This means that the mother's role is to sacrifice for her child. She becomes an ascetic. It's important to recognize how to raise children well, but it's equally important to separate facts from fiction. And what the maternal instinct does is it feeds us a narrative that women should give up on their ambition to be morally good.
It's always seemed unfair to me that we don't get to choose our names, right? We don't get to choose our like childhood and the things that are going to really form us in big ways. We don't get to choose. We have no choice in all of that. And we have all the work afterwards too.
We owe it to ourselves, to society, and to our own mothers to pick apart these fictions. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, please like this video and share it with a friend who might find it interesting. Also, I have a Patreon page where you can support me monthly, get access to exclusive content and all that good stuff. And if you like this video, I have another video over here I think you would also enjoy, so check it out.